This is a story of how my series emblem ended up on the cover of my book because what I'd originally drawn in the cover art was so bad that people were seeing things on it that weren't there. Hey, I'm Viv, and welcome back to my channel. Welcome back to my journey of publishing and launching my debut novel and debut series. The first book's called Call of Matter. The series falls under the banner of Erastasis, which is, of course, also the name of the world that the series takes place in. So, the last time we chatted, I was talking about my dev edits, I was talking about my beta reader report, and some genuinely very interesting things in there, as well as some very funny findings from there. My manuscript, which the third draft, which went into beta readers, was 138,000 words, is now after post edits is 108,000 words, and that's sitting with my editor now. He's hard at work on it, and I get to now dive in fully into the second book of the series, which first draft is already done, and I'm in the process of working through second draft now. I took a little bit of time off. I took 2 weeks, went on vacation, and during that time, I just had a lot of time in my mind to think about things and discovered really interesting things about my writing process, and what that actually says about how my brain works, and what that says about me as a person. And I can't wait to talk to you about that, actually, because it blew my mind when I realized, when I'm seeing things like, oh my God, this world like fell into my head, this stuff deluged into my head, these scenes deluged into my head. Apparently that's actually very much connected with how my brain actually works. And apparently not everyone's brain works that way, which is so interesting because like I'm already like going off on my first tangent because I've spent 2 weeks like obsessed with this topic, couldn't stop thinking about it. Because obviously I thought everyone else's minds work this way because I've only ever been in my own mind, right? Like I've never been in anyone else's mind. So I just assumed everyone else's mind worked this way when it doesn't. And how I found out is a very funny story that I can't wait to tell you, but that's a story for another time. So, end tangent. Good. So today then, yes, so you got a little bit update beta read report. You got an update in terms of where my manuscript is at. We are still pacing wonderfully towards a February launch. Book 2 is very much underway. I'm so excited about it. Draft 2 is, of course, always harder than draft 1, actually, for me. Maybe for other people it works a different way, but for me, draft 2 is, draft 2 for me is more challenging. Draft 3 gets a little bit easier again. Draft 4, which is the dev edit, is absolutely painful, but again, that will be covered in a future video. Why I always work this way, actually, I can't really explain why my mind works this way, but that's why my process works this way, because that's the way my mind works. Anyways, okay, so then today we're gonna branch off and talk a little bit about creative again. So the last time we talked about creative, we talked about the title treatment of my cover art, which is the logo. In my world, in corporate, we call that a logo. In the book world, they call that a title treatment. So Call of Matter, exactly how the words are written, which now it occurs to me, I'm gonna go through that process again for all 7 of the books I have planned. That's a lot of drawing, because I didn't use a font. I actually drew it by hand, and then of course scanned it in, traced it in Affinity Designer, where I drew the vector, I vectorized it. And it was a very long process, but hopefully now the feeling is I've learned how to use it. I've learned the skills. I've learned how to do a vector. So maybe the 6 other iterations of it won't be quite as painful. Good. Okay. So we talked about the title treatment, and now we're going to, like I said in the beginning of the video, talk a bit about the series emblem. So for those of you who are listening and not watching, what I am throwing on top of the video now is, of course, the emblem. You can see it on my website. I've shown it very subtly for now. You can barely see it. You can see it in the favicon. But of course, on the actual website, or if you're subscribed to my mailing list, I always use it in the header. It's behind the title treatment. It's very subtle for now. And that's purposeful because I will be revealing the cover art a little bit later. So right now you just see a bit of a teaser, but what I have thrown on top of the video is what the emblem actually looks like. And I want to talk a little bit about how we actually got to this point. So, oh my God. Okay, so this was something that I designed actually before the title treatment. So I'm gonna be like totally transparent with you how all of this stuff actually came together. So what is the emblem? What is a series emblem? It is an emblem of, some people were like, they were like, it's dragon. I'm like, no, it's not a dragon, it's a bird. And it's not actually an it, it's a they. The bird's name is Talix or Talix, depending on which character you ask. So in the world of Erastasis, within my cast of characters, accents do play a role. And I'll actually explain why in a future video, what inspired me, why accents are actually, they do become important. So I don't want to spoil anything in the book, but the protagonist, Tori Sable, speaks in a different accent from my MMC, Zachary Triton. Cassidy Song, another side character, speaks in a different accent. There's kind of like this more standard formal accent, which is the standard Helixan accent. So the capital of Erastasis is called Helix or Halix, again, depending on who you ask. So the pronunciation of things does change depending on who you ask, depending on the accent. But for example, Zach pronounces Talix as Talix, whereas everyone else will pronounce it as Talix, including Cassidy, including Tori, including Alice and Lily. They pronounce this as Talix. I pronounce it Talix because I'm the author and that's how Talix came to my mind. I'm not saying that I, in my mind, in the series would have the same accent as Zach would, but for example, I pronounce Helix as Helix, he pronounces it as Halix, and as well as Talix. But for example, Tori would pronounce in her head as Helix and Talix, and I decide I pronounce it as Talix, which is the Zach way of pronouncing it, but I pronounce Helix as Helix, which would be the Tori way of pronouncing it because I'm the author and I said so, and that's what I feel like pronouncing it as in my head. I gotta think about how I'm gonna handle this in the audiobook, to be honest. I guess because I'm narrating from Tori's POV, I will need to teach myself to pronounce it as Talix every single time, or edit it out whenever I pronounce it wrong. But for the purposes of the video, I'm gonna say Talix because I'm gonna mess it up. And honestly, you're here to talk to Viv, the author, not Viv, the narrator in the audiobook. So you're just gonna hear it the way I hear it in my head. So Talix is the deity in Erastasis. And Talix is a bird that you don't really see because they are a deity. They are a they. That's the pronoun for Talix. And Talix is a bird that can be born from all four elements. So as I've mentioned in the magic system in Erastasis, there's a bunch of different, I will have a separate video for the magic system in the future, but there are different calls. So there are things like motion calls where you can pull something or push something. There are transformational calls where you can warp something. For example, a shattered vase can be brought back together without touching it. So the characters, the Erastasians, they manipulate matter. There are also elemental calls. So those are, water, fire, earth, and air. So how Talix can be reborn from all four of the elements. That's the Erastasian belief. So Talix can be reborn from all four elements, but Talix was originally born from water. And so there is actually like a whole poem associated with Talix's background. But how I always envisioned Talix, because Talix was originally born from water. So I'm actually gonna read the passage directly from the book. So I'm staying true to what I've said. So this is what the Talix emblem looks like. This is how I always saw it, the emblem in my mind. And how I actually got, so let me read it first, and then we'll talk to what actually inspired me and why I actually thought about this. So, forged out of metal, the emblem looked like an ornately designed letter E at first glance, though upon further inspection, I could see it was a bird in mid-flight. My eyes darted to the title of the art piece, which had been etched into a marble plaque on the wall, Talix Reborn. I took a step back and saw it then. The bottom of the E, which I'd thought had been the bird's other wing, was actually a series of waves. Okay, so again, for those of you who are listening, not watching, the emblem that you can find on my website, I've just thrown that on top of the video again to kind of really point out what we're really looking at here. What actually really inspired me is I was thinking about, Talix for me was always going to be Talix. I don't know, it just kind of fell into my head that there was always going to be the deity who the Erastasians believe are the ones who granted them these gifts. The gifts come with a cost, which I will also explain later in a future video why I got to that. But they have these gifts, the gift of matter and manipulation, the gift of immortality, and the Talix was always a bird for me. And why I kind of got to this emblem. So, in case it's not super obvious, Talix looking like an E. E is for Erastasis, obviously. And that's why this is like the emblem of Erastasis. And the emblem is actually visible on, so for example, the legions is the military in Erastasis. So they're called the legions of Helix. And the emblem can be seen on the backs of the jacket. So it's not obviously printed on, it's stitched on subtly black on black so that you only actually see it in some light when it's at an angle or something like this. So you don't really see it unless you're super up close. You're looking at the embroidery, or you see it at an angle and the light hits it in a certain way and you can see the difference in the material. So that's kind of the design there. But of course, also the way I described it, Tori's standing in the library, she sees the emblem on the wall, she's describing what she's seeing here, and it's an emblem, it's forged out of metal, and it's the symbol that they see. So why was I inspired by it being an E, as well as the bird or Talix being in mid-flight? And from afar, as you can see, if you just look at it, and I don't really tell you, Talix looks like a bird in mid-flight where there's the top wing and then there's the bottom wing. But I actually specifically drew it where there's a separation between Talix's body, the upper part, and then there's a separation between the body and the bottom wing. So you could see it as, okay, this is an illustrative design choice, that there's a separation. But actually, I did that on purpose because that bottom wing is also supposed to look like a series of waves upside down. So again, for those of you who are listening, not watching, you'll see what I'm pointing to in the actual video, the separation in the bottom wing, where the waves, and I will actually kind of move the wing around so that you can see those are actually waves. I've just put them upside down. And the reason why I was inspired by this, so I was thinking about, okay, well, how bird emblems, this is nothing new. There's loads of bird emblems. And I was thinking about how a lot of bird emblems usually actually have the bird vertically. I'm kind of acting it out. I'm actually really also thinking about the German one, actually. I live in Germany. I don't know if that was really obvious. I don't know if I've ever talked about that, but I will do a video in terms of about me. So you find out how did you get here? What did you do before this? All this kind of stuff. So I will do that in a future video, but basically a lot of times the bird's kind of like this, maybe a bit on an angle, but usually it's like this. So, but what I saw when I saw these emblems, for whatever reason, my mind kind of went to well, what if I turn it on its side? It looks like an E for Erastasis. And I couldn't get this idea out of my head. And so that's what I drew, actually. So the notebook is back. My terrible drawings are back. And so I kind of started off with kind of like something like this. So I don't know if you can, like, you probably can't really see that. I might zoom in the final edit so you can see it. But my first drawings were very ugly. You can even see like where I've torn out pages to layer one on top of the other, because I would draw one version and be like, oh, I like this part, but I hate this other part. So I would like trace it. I know there's a thing called tracing paper. I could have just bought tracing paper and bought like real pencils. But of course, like I didn't bother doing that. And I actually went and like traced certain parts that I liked onto the next page and kind of redrew that bottom bit. Here's me trying to like draw the body. I netted out, I think, in the end. Yeah, I netted out, I think, yeah, you can see the rip pages where I went and scanned it in. But this is kind of like the version I originally netted out and liked. And of course, you can tell like the final version is very different, right? So I went and traced that in Affinity and simplified it a lot. Like I made it a lot neater. What I'm showing again in the video right now, layering on top, is kind of how I used the big circle, the smaller circle as like a tracing device to kind of a guide to make sure it really stayed like an emblem. Because like, honestly guys, like I'm not like an artist. Like I don't know how to draw. I never took like art lessons. I never learned how to draw. I just know what I see in my head. And I was trying to get my limbs to cooperate, my hands to cooperate, but like I don't have those skills, but I knew what I saw in my head. And it took me 3 days actually from pencil sketch to final result. And this was at the same time like learning how to use Affinity Designer. So I know I talked about in my last video that I had to learn Affinity Designer to also do my logo, my title treatment, but that actually came second. The emblem came first. Luckily, because actually the title treatment and the text was way more challenging to do. There's just so many more of them. Like I had to do like every single letter. It's a much more complex process doing the different layers of like, as you can see in the text, like there's swooping elements that go above it, behind it, started picking colors. Like this was extremely time consuming. But the emblem I'm so glad I started with the emblem, because the emblem in comparison it was just at least like 2 elements, you know what I mean? But it took a while to get there, because I started off like the first day I was trying to draw this emblem. Like I just had no clue. Like I didn't know how to draw a curve. I didn't know what a node was. I just actually had no clue. It was so frustrating, like getting what was in my head first on paper when you don't know how to draw, and then trying to transform that into something that looks polished on a screen using a professional program. So the people who don't know Affinity Designer, this is not like an easy design tool. So Affinity Designer, I would say, is basically Adobe Illustrator, but like free. But it's just as complex. So I did my research. I've used Illustrator before. Actually, no, sorry, I haven't used Illustrator before, but I've used Photoshop, I've used InDesign. So I know how to use InDesign because that's also, back in my corporate days, that's how I did my resume. I didn't do it in Microsoft Word or something. I did it in InDesign because you just have way more control over it. And Illustrator I'd never used before, but the challenge with Adobe tools is, of course, you have to pay the monthly fee, which is fine. But I just like did my research. I was just like, okay, well, let's just see like what else is out there. I've never asked the question. Like I said, I'm not a graphic designer. I've just never asked the question of like, okay, what is out there? And what I discovered is that a lot of creators are choosing to use, I mean, no knock on Adobe. I mean, that's the industry standard. That's great, especially if you are working with an agency, are in an agency. Like, I mean, for me in my corporate life, .ai is like the only file format I've ever known, right? Other than of course .id or .ps, but AI is like, that's like the industry standard. For me, at the end of the day, it just came down to keeping an eye on my operating costs. because whatever I save in the monthly operating costs can go into other things related to the business and the startup capital. I might actually do a video at some point about how I decide to do my budgeting and investment for this actual, for my book launch, which I'm running like a startup basically. But anyways, that's like a totally separate thing. Back to Affinity Designer. So I decided to use Affinity Designer, not because it was easy, it was not. But the cool thing about Affinity Designer is that it basically has Illustrator built in like I don't know, I think it's called like the vector tool. There's like 2 tools within the program. And the vector, there's like a vector tool, and then there is a layout tool, and the layout tool is basically InDesign. So it has Illustrator and InDesign in one program. It was a cost thing at the end of the day. I've never used Illustrator. I'm going to learn everything from scratch anyways, and I might as well do the one that is most advantageous for me. So it's different for everyone. Like for me, it's not like I'm working in a collaborative environment where I need to have like a standard, like the industry standard, right? It's kind of like learning the language everyone else speaks so you can work with them. Like for me, I'm kind of working in my own silo for now. So I was like, okay, well, I don't really need a file format that's transferable to every other designer to take over. So I was just like, I'll just do it on Affinity Designer. But Affinity Designer is basically the same, I would say, nearly the same professional level as Illustrator. The learning curve is just as difficult, which is why it was so challenging for me. And it took like 3 days to land the emblem. All right, so that's the emblem. So the emblem was always going to exist. It's not that it's like, oh my God, like this emblem, because of feedback I received with the cover art, now the emblem exists. No, the emblem came first, before the title treatment, before the cover art. So like I said, I did the entire cover art for my book from original ideas floating in my head to learning Affinity Designer to final finished products in 2 weeks. And the first 3 days was emblem. Then I spent probably, I would say, a week doing title treatment, picking colors, et cetera, et cetera. And then just like the last couple of days, getting feedback, getting votes, and doing the fine tuning. And so I would say how the emblem ended up on the front cover of the book. So the notebook's coming back out. We're gonna talk about how what I had originally intended for the book cover. Like I said, the power is matter manipulation. Like I said, there are motion calls, there are transformational calls, there are elemental calls. And hence the title of the book, Call of Matter, which actually has multiple meanings, as you will find out when you read the book. But one of them, of course, is that their usage of the power of manipulation, they colloquially, or in their day-to-day language, they call that call. So I'm gonna call water. When you push, that's a call. Pushing is a call. That's just like that's like the terminology they use for their actual magic system, for their matter manipulation. They don't say they will formally, like in a school environment, say you manipulate this chair to duplicate it. You manipulate the water molecules to create rain. You manipulate to create, et cetera, et cetera. So you can say that, but for day to day, like especially if you're in the legions, if you're in the military, you're not going to say, I manipulated that. You're just going to be like, I called water. I called a tidal wave. I called a tornado, whatever. So that's like when you're not a student anymore. I think officially, formally, they'll be like, okay, well, you manipulated this. It's matter manipulation. But once you're like you're like a professional, you're like a bit older, you're like doing this every day. Like it's like, I called it. That's the terminology they use. Okay, so my MMC so I won't explain why because I don't want to spoil it, but he does have a signature move that you will see in the book where he, in one of the scenes, he calls a tidal wave. Which is why I had so I won't show you the second page because that's going to spoil the second book's name as well as the second book's theme. But I had originally thought for my cover art for the 7 books, I will do like big title, of course, and in the background like a scenescape of like something that's representative of what's happened in this book. So I had originally drawn this. So for those of you who are listening, not watching, it is a image of, so it's like call it matter in big text on top in the old title treatment I had designed. And then there are mountains, which are representative of where we are in the first book. The location also changes in book 2 and book 3. And also all the other 7 books. Book 7, it's not like it takes place in a couple of locations, but I would say books 1 through 6 all have very distinctly different locations, actually. So you'll get to kind of do a little tour throughout Erastasis. But what you see is mountains represented in book 1, and then what's supposed to be a big tidal wave on top that is bigger than the mountains. And I had drawn a first iteration, which I'm now showing on top. It's horrible. This is why this was first iteration when I think that was like day 1 learning how to use the tool. No clue what I was doing. Didn't even know how to select colors, actually. I literally did not know what I was doing. But I will now rapidly show through in the video the different iterations and then the final version of this cover art that I ended up showing around 2 people. I was so proud of it, getting it to this point. Like, you remember, this is like days after I started using the tool. So I'm like getting a hang of it. I'm feeling invincible. I'm like, I know how to do curves. I know how to do gradients. I know how to pick colors. I got this. So, I'm feeling really good about myself at this point. I'm showing it. And first I show it to my husband. My husband is Austrian. At home we speak Denglish. Very, very much so. I'm fluent in German, by the way. So I'm fluent, of course. English is my native and dominant language, but it actually isn't my first language. So I grew up first speaking Cantonese. Cantonese Chinese. My family's originally from Hong Kong. I'm born and raised in Canada. So my first language was Cantonese. That's what we spoke at home. Of course, like I grew up in Canada, so school, all this kind of stuff, like I did all of that in English. So that's why it's my dominant language. And like English is how that's like how my inner thought process is in this language. Interestingly though, so I dream, I would say, in a mix of English and Cantonese. Of course, like language for me, when I'm thinking inner thoughts, all this kind of stuff, it's all in English. But interestingly, numbers are in Cantonese for me. That's how I do math. I think, so if I'm memorizing a phone number, I'm like dating myself here. Who memorizes phone numbers anymore? Back in the day when I had to memorize phone numbers, I did that in Cantonese, Chinese. And when I'm doing math, I still do that in Chinese, actually. So anyways, whatever. Whoa, random side tangent. I will cover that in a future video about my background and all this kind of stuff. But basically, so my Austrian husband turns to me and goes, ach so, this is der Vogel, which in German is like, oh my God, I see the bird. I'm like what bird? Like, what are you talking about? Like, that's a wave. He's like, oh, right, yeah, yeah, totally. I totally see the wave. But his first reaction, he's like, oh my God, the bird. And I'm like, okay, whatever. Like, what does he know? By the way, my husband is the one, if anyone follows me on social media, and I do a bit about automotive engineer fact checks romantically. That's my husband. So he is the Austrian automotive engineer. We live in Germany, but he is Austrian. So that was my husband. I'm like, what does he know, right? He doesn't get like art. So then I show my mother. And she's like, oh my God, Aki, that's a joke. I'm like, man, joke. Okay, so that's Cantonese for like, oh my God, I see the bird. It's same reaction, different language. Aki, that's a joke. Different language, same shit. So yeah. Yes, same stuff. And she's like, I see the bird. I'm like, there is no bird. What are you talking about? It's a wave. And she's like, oh yeah. My dad's like, yep, definitely see the wave. My mom's like, yeah, I see the wave. Everyone's like, I see the wave. I'm like, yeah, only after I told you. Like, what? This looks like a wave. It doesn't look like a bird. My opinion, I don't know. You let me know in the comments. I didn't think it was so bad. But like, everyone just kept seeing a bird. Like, at this point, my mom didn't even know really what the book was about. Like, or maybe she'd started. No, at this point, she hadn't even read it yet. So she has no idea. She's like, oh my God, No, I think at this point, maybe she started it. I mean, Talix makes their first appearance quite early in the book. So like she probably like knew that the bird was part of it. Marcus definitely knew, my husband, because at this point he read draft 2, actually the version even before it went to betas. So he knows about Talix and he's like, oh my God, it's the bird. My mom's like, it's the bird. I'm like, guys, there's no bird. What are you talking about? So at some point I was just like, you know what? If you can't beat them, join them. And I got this idea because actually I got the feedback from also one of my friends working in publishing. I got feedback from another friend who reads this genre, not like voraciously, not religiously, but she does read it. And the feedback I got from the first cover art, which I think is, I'm so glad I asked around because I actually completely agree with it, is they're like, first of all, one of my friends said, it looks like kind of like sci-fi, which I was like, okay, yes, I see that, true. And I got more than one piece of feedback. They're like, it doesn't communicate romance to me. Like the romance part of romantasy is missing, and also not enough fantasy elements. It really looks like it looks like a sci-fi book. And I was like, okay, really good feedback. It was actually really embarrassing for me though, to be honest, because it's what I said also about the title treatment. Like for me, I'm like, I've been in branding and marketing for 14 years. Like I should know this. Like my first project when I was recruited in my first job, my first project was like a packaging design project. I'm like, I know packaging cues. Like I know how this works. Like how did I miss that? But that's the problem when you're also the one engineering the product. So I'm the writer. So for me, I was like, oh my God, I have this picture in my mind of like what the story's about. And this is what I want to communicate on the cover art. And like, this is what I'm imagining. Like it's like blue because blue is kind of an important color in the first, in like the first trilogy. Like the first 3 books of the 7 books. And so I was like, oh, I want to, like, I'm like envisioning this. And it's like, no, Viv, like, you need to communicate the key themes of what people are shopping for, obviously. So I went back to the drawing board, and I will probably cover that in a future video, how I netted out on the colors, how I netted out on the exact design elements, like why I have, I don't even want to spoil it yet because the cover art isn't released yet to the public. So I will cover that later when the cover art actually comes out. But for now, we're just gonna talk about the emblem. Anyways, the cover art, they were like, looks like sci-fi, doesn't look like romantic. So I'm like, okay, back to the drawing board. I was just like, at this point, I was so, in German we say durch. Ich war so durch einfach. And the translation in English is like, I was just like, so like, oh my God, I don't want to do this anymore. Like, I'm just so over it. I want to throw in the towel. I want to give up so bad. I'm so tired of like picking like colors, like drawing shapes, drawing vectors. At this point, I was still really slow at it. So everything just felt excruciating. And I had already had this emblem drawn and banked. So I thought I'm going to put the emblem in like a relief on the back of the book, like behind the blurb. And I always thought like, okay, the emblem, it's gonna always serve as kind of like a favicon for the website, but also like favicon on like the spine of the book. Like it's always gonna be like symbol of the series, but I'm not gonna like put it on the front. And then I just thought at that moment, it was actually honestly out of pure laziness. I was just like, I'm so over this. I just wanna like move on. I want my life to move on from this task. And I put Talix on the cover of the book. And then I did a bunch of other things in addition to this. Then I actually completely redid the title treatment because the version that you guys saw in the wave design has a different title treatment than what you see on my website now, and what I'm actually showing on top of the video right now. And I went and like redid the title treatment. I like put the bird on the front and I fired it off to the circle of people who have been a part of this journey. And the immediate response was like, I love it. I love it. This is it. This is the one. And I was like, so I just spent literally days of my life trying to figure out how to draw waves properly, trying to like draw mountains, like perfect like this scenescape idea. Meanwhile, the idea for the cover art was always there in this emblem. Because like honestly at this point, I was just so exhausted. I was like, honestly, if I can't beat them, join them. People are seeing a bird. Let's give them the damn bird. I gave them the damn bird and I was like, I love it. This is it. This is the one. They were like, I see it, it's like, it communicates like adventure, it's mysterious, like Talix being on there, like all the other elements, like the colors I chose, the title treatment, they're like, I'm getting fantasy, I'm getting romance out of this, I'm getting like the mystery, the adventure out of like all of it. It's like in the cover art. And so that is actually the story of how the emblem ended up by accident. The series emblem ended up on the cover of the book. Because people, like honestly, like my first cover art, like they were just, the drawing is just, like people were seeing bird for some weird reason, no matter what I did, no matter, like you have no idea, like the amount of times I researched like how waves look in two-dimensional vectors. Like no matter what I did like the swirls, I did like the multi-cut, like the gradient swirls to try to like show like the white part of the wave when it curls in. Like no matter what I did, people were like, bird. I'm still seeing bird. Like they can't unsee the bird. And I was just like, oh my God, I actually have a bird drawn. I'm just gonna put the damn bird on and see what happens. And everybody loved it. So that's how we ended up in the state that we're in. And that's how we ended up with the bird on the cover of the book, which you haven't even seen yet because cover art's not done. But that's how Talix ended up as the, like the main artwork. Also for the actual cover art rather than just a secondary design element to represent the series. And yeah, so that's the latest from me. And if you like following along with the journey, you like kind of hearing what's going on, you're excited about the book launch in February, then hit the subscribe button, take a look at my other videos. Thanks so much. Until next time.